Somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, sealed inside a ring of coral that stretches for more than 100 miles, sits a graveyard most people will never see. To even get close to it requires specialized clearance, a trained crew, and steady nerves. Underneath the warm, glass-clear water of this lagoon lies an entire naval fleet. More than 50 ships, hundreds of aircraft, and the remains of thousands of men remain frozen in the exact moment they went down, over 80 years ago. Locals call it the Ghost Fleet. Divers who have descended into it call it the most dangerous graveyard on Earth. And by international law, it is a highly restricted, legally protected war grave. Welcome to Vanished Fleet. If you're the kind of person who likes to press play while you're working, cooking, or just lying back after a long day, this channel is built for you. Let the story run in the background, and we will bring the ships and submarines that history quietly buried back to the surface. Even now, in an age where we can map the deepest trenches of the ocean, this specific location remains one of the most strictly guarded and least disturbed battlefields on Earth, a place where the past is physically walled off by the sea. To understand why this lagoon became a graveyard, look at its geography. A massive coral reef, 40 miles across, rings volcanic islands like a natural fortress wall. Inside sits a calm, deep harbor, shielded from ocean swells and naval gunfire. After the First World War, Japan was given control of these islands under a League of Nations mandate. At the time, it was an obscure tropical outpost that most of the world had never heard of. Almost immediately, and in complete secrecy, Japanese engineers went to work. Through the 1920s and 30s, they carved airstrips into the islands. They hid fuel depots, ammunition bunkers, repair yards, and radio stations deep among the palm trees. By the time war broke out, Truk Lagoon had become the forward operating base of the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet. Western military planners called it the Gibraltar of the Pacific. It served as the anchor point for Japan's naval operations outside of its home islands. By February of 1944, the lagoon was packed. It held cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and dozens of heavy transport ships and oil tankers, loaded with fuel, aircraft parts, and supplies destined for garrisons scattered across the Pacific. Japan had effectively combined a warehouse and a harbor into one protected space. But by clustering their critical logistical lifeline behind a single coral wall, they created a massive enclosed target. The American Navy answered with a new kind of striking power, the Fast Carrier Task Force. Under the command of Rear Admiral Mark Mitcher, Task Force 58 was ordered to send a massive wave of carrier aircraft deep behind enemy lines to strike the base independently, without any supporting ground invasion. Codenamed Hailstone, the operation began just before dawn on February 17th. American fighters swept in low and fast, catching the defenders by surprise. Within hours, they crippled Japan's air cover, rendering the runways unusable and trapping the ships anchored inside the lagoon. Wave after wave of dive bombers and torpedo planes hunted down vessels trying to flee through the narrow reef passages. The Americans deliberately waited to attack the island fuel and ammunition stores until after this first wave, ensuring the thick black smoke wouldn't obscure their maritime targets too early. By the end of the second day, the numbers were staggering. The Americans sent more than 40 Japanese ships to the bottom, over 220,000 tons of shipping. They eliminated 5 critical oil tankers, meant to keep the Pacific campaign running, and destroyed roughly 250 aircraft. In just 48 hours, an engineering project that took nearly 2 decades to build was entirely dismantled. The strike severed the supply line, immediately paralyzing Japan's ability to wage war across the Pacific. What makes Truk Lagoon distinct from other naval battlefields is the nature of the vessels lost. These were primarily transport ships, floating warehouses moving supplies to the front lines. Because the attack happened so suddenly, they took their entire cargo with them to the bottom. Decades later, divers exploring the deep holes found dismantled Zero fighters still sitting in their crates. They found trucks, bulldozers, and heavy construction equipment still strapped down exactly where the dock workers had left them. In certain holes, the wrecks offer a sobering human detail. Divers have found gas masks, sake bottles, boots, and personal effects belonging to the crew members who never made it off. These holes are active tombs. Because of this, the modern islands of Chuuk enforce strict legal protections. Penetrating the wrecks or removing artifacts without authorization is a criminal offense. The absolute totality of the destruction meant these ships bypassed the salvage yards of history. They were swallowed whole by the ocean, preserving an untouched time capsule of a military supply chain exactly as it existed in February of 1944. But that preservation comes with severe physical hazards. Many of these wrecks still hold live torpedoes, aerial bombs, and artillery shells. 80 years of saltwater corrosion does unpredictable things to explosives, making this unexploded ordnance highly unstable. The structural integrity of the vessels is also failing. Decades on the seafloor have weakened decks and bulkheads to the point where corridors can collapse without warning, posing a fatal trap for technical divers. And buried inside the bunkers is a modern threat. Thousands of tons of unburned oil remain sealed inside rapidly deteriorating steel tanks. Marine researchers monitor the mounting pressure. If these hulls rupture, they will release a massive toxic plume, creating an environmental disaster. While the oil waits inside, the outside of the ships has been claimed by the sea. Soft corals now bloom in brilliant colors along the rusted plating, and schools of tropical fish use the weapons of war as shelter, turning a graveyard into a thriving artificial reef. Truk Lagoon exists as a singular space where history, memory, and natural beauty are all locked in a slow, silent battle against time. It is a reminder that even in shallow water, the ocean is far from giving up its secrets.